So this is just going to be your lecture video. So if we go into our materials folder, you can see that we have a textbook link and some slides. Now the slides I don't use so much when I lecture over this chapter. You can see it's 21 pages. It's a lengthy document, but it goes through kind of maybe a little bit more detail or different details than what your text is going to go through. So you can feel free to use this as like a supplement if you would like to. So feel free to kind of peruse through here. It's going to go into some other details because chapter 6 is all about preparing for and taking tests. So I'm just going to use the textbook to guide my discussion for this. All right, so chapter 6, preparing for and taking tests. So, as always, a self-assessment at the beginning of the chapter, some goal setting where you want to go as it relates to kind of preparing, studying, and test taking, and how this chapter is going to help you. So first of all, as a college student, you're assessed all the time, it seems, right? Quizzes, tests, projects, presentations, case studies, clinicals. So there are assessments constantly as a college student, but the reality is you're also assessed in the career field, right? You might have performance evaluations. You might have to sit down and talk about your performance with your boss in an informal way. You might have to do presentations with your clients or whatever it might be. So we're always going to be assessed. It might not just be like the paper pencil way that we think of whenever we're in a classroom. So how we can go about preparing for tests, we want to think about there's this cycle, just like with the learning processes. When we prepare and test take, we want to prepare, absorb new ideas, record, and apply. So this should look familiar because this is part of that learning cycle we talked about in a previous chapter. So whenever we are taking tests, we might feel this test anxiety. A little bit of anxiety is okay because that tells us that, hey, this is important. I really need to focus or pay attention to this. It's when the anxiety becomes too much is whenever it's going to be a stumbling block. It's going to be an obstacle. So sometimes we view an assessment, whether it's a quiz, a presentation, as kind of like a threat because we feel like it's going to either make us look bad or it's going to impact our grade badly. So oftentimes because of that, when we view a test situation as a threat, our critical thinking skills kind of like shut down and we go into like fight or flight mode. And that's what test anxiety is we're in fight or flight. And so we don't need critical thinking when we're in fight or flight mode. We just need those very primitive, I'm going to run away from this threat or I'm going to fight this threat. I don't need to know how to do all these mathematical formulas whenever I am in, fight or flight. So that's kind of what that feeling of like going blank is whenever you have a test and you think you're prepared and you go blank when it goes in front of you. So here's a self-assessment about testing anxiety. If you feel like you have it, or maybe you have it, that's kind of just a real quick assessment. And so here are some things you can do to be prepared so you're not so stressed or have that anxiety. Study. Being prepared is one of the best ways to try to combat test anxiety. So not cramming last minute. If you know you have a test in 2 weeks, studying a little bit every night leading up to that test. 5 minutes one night, 10 minutes the next, and so on. Really try to challenge your negative thinking. If you have a negative attitude toward an assessment, I'm never going to pass this, I don't know this information, well then odds are you're not going to do well. So you want to make sure that you try to be a little bit more positive. So visualize success. Even if you have to kind of lie to yourself at first, like, okay, I don't know everything, but I do know this, section. So really try to build your confidence. Don't compare yourself to other people. I tell this to my own kids. I tell this to my own students in the classroom. Whenever someone gets a test and it seems like they get done very quickly, you might feel like, oh my gosh, why aren't I done already? Well, you have no idea whether they knew everything and got through quickly or they knew nothing. And so they just filled out as fast as they could just to get out of there. So try not to compare yourself to other students. Focus on yourself. Come up with a study plan, a plan of attack for the test, and then follow it. And then, of course, there's these make sure you sleep well, make sure you eat well, get there early, and then just relax. Relaxation exercises, deep breaths, progressive muscle relaxation when you tighten, start with your toes, ball them into a fist of your toes, hold it for 10 seconds, let go, and work your way up. Just kind of really making sure that you're calming yourself. So here's a little exercise about that negative self-talk, like how can you go beyond that? So if you want to maybe practice concepts that you kind of say to yourself, like, I hate math, I'm not good at math. Like, how can you transfer that to a more positive statement? Or why do you feel that way? The next section is talking about studying to learn. So not just to pass a test. when you're in college. Obviously, you want to do well, but it's not all about grades. It's about what you're learning as well. So you want to make sure that you're not cramming the night before, where that might work for the test. It's not going to work long term. So if you have a chapter 1 test and you cram the night before and you do well the next day, okay, great. But then what happens in 3 weeks when you have a unit test over chapters 1, 2, and 3? And you cannot remember for the life of you anything about chapter 1. It's because you crammed all the information in and it never really moved from your short-term to your long-term memory. So you really want to make sure that you are viewing testing as a way to build your knowledge, not just pass a test. So ways you can do this, ways you can make sure that you are preparing adequately is, study a little bit every day, visualize success, really practice cementing your knowledge, whatever that means for you. If you're a visual learner, if you're an auditory learner, or hands-on learner, here are some strategies to get yourself ready for, those larger tests, studying a little bit every day, even if you don't have a test coming up, just really working with that information. And before an exam, ask yourself some questions. What kind of questions do I think, if I were the teacher, would I put on this? What is important in this area? What kind of questions should I expect or ask your instructor? Is this short answer? Is this fill in the blank? Because you should approach different tests differently. Here are some other just general tips. Make sure that you are on a study schedule. Build that into your time management plan, not only the time you're in class or the time you're working, but when are you studying? Make sure that you're in a right space physically and mentally. Make sure you're not distracted, whatever that might be to you, devices, other people, and give yourself some breaks. Also, studying in groups, it might be beneficial for you to study with other people. It could be a very helpful thing to hear things from other perspectives. Sometimes having a classmate or a friend explain something to you, it clicks, whereas maybe the instructor wasn't quite getting across. So you want to hear some tips for effective group study. I know not everyone likes studying with groups, but if you do, here are ways to make that a more successful experience. Okay, next section. Okay, let's actually take the test. So now we have different types of tests. We have that formative, which are the smaller, quizzes, pop quizzes, reviews, and then summative, which are larger, the midterms and finals, to really see how you're doing overall with a lot of the concepts. You also have the more traditional in-class tests. Open book tests, I always tell my students, even if it's open book, open notes, still study. You cannot spend your entire time flipping through pages because you're going to waste your time. Make sure you still know the information, take notes on it. You have take-home tests. I also tell my students that I tend to grade these a little bit more with scrutiny because you have more time, you have more resources. So you really want to make sure that you're also taking your time, utilizing that time to do your best work on those. Online tests, you want to make sure that you're practicing tests, practice questions if you can. Make sure you get it done early because if there's technology issues, so there's different formats of tests. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes you're assessed through presentations. And so that's a whole different type of assessment. Here are some general test taking tips. So learning as much as you can, ask the instructor, what's the format of this? Is this multiple choice? As I said, you want to prepare for those a little differently. Here's the information on, don't cram. Again, it seems like it works, but in the big picture, it's going to be more harmful than helpful, especially if you have those unit tests later. Create that test plan, stick to it. Writing down key facts ahead of time, not necessarily on a sheet or on the test, but just ahead of the test. Just write down things that you make sure you want to remember. There's a big connection between the writing and memory. Be very careful with your directions. I often have students miss very easy questions or parts of questions because they didn't read the directions carefully enough. Spend your time on the easy questions first. Go back and answer the more difficult questions. Only change your answer if you're really certain that you got it wrong the first time. Track your time and go back and double check. This section goes through specific strategies for different subject areas. If you are in math or science, here are some very general test taking tips for those subjects. Our next section here is, again, those different types of tests. And this is where, if you look here, there's a whole bunch of more tips in this PDF that you are welcome to kind of scroll through. It gives more details, more strategies for the different types of modalities of tests. So how to prepare for multiple choice questions, true, false, matching. I'm not sure if you have very many matching at this level, but in case you do, short answer and essay, which are, you can prepare for those in a similar fashion. Here are some verbiage that you might come across, especially in the essay test. You know, things, what are they really asking when they ask you to analyze something, when they ask you to define something? So here is like what it means and what they're looking for. Those are usually, again, in short answer or essay type questions. Then, and we're almost finished with the chapter here, the honest truth. So you're going to have questions about this with your discussion forum, you know, academic integrity and making sure that you are being academically honest. Reasons we obviously don't want to go this route is, you know, you're cheating yourself out of that experience. You are risking a lot of severe consequences. You actually get more stressed if you are academically dishonest just from a fear of being found out. And, you know, it's really a waste of your own time and money. Here are some other, you know, technology obviously presents kind of this easier way to access information in the wrong ways. And here are some other examples of academic dishonesty. This is going to come up in your Chapter 6 discussion forum, so I'm going to bring this back up when it's time to talk about that section. But these are the different forms of academic dishonesty, and some of these you might be familiar with just in general, and some of them might be a little new for you. But again, in the assignment video, I will go over these a little bit more in detail. And then finally, the last section talks about how you want to use your test results. You know, once you get your test back, you don't want to just tuck it away. You want to look and see, how can I improve this moving forward? What did I do nicely with? What do I need to work on? So that you can make those corrections moving forward, especially if you have, you know, a unit tests that are coming up later. And here's just a breakdown of different types of errors students may make as they are taking their tests, and how you can go about correcting those. All right, so as always, I encourage you to take a look at Chapter 6 a little bit more in detail, especially if there's a section in here that you need to focus on a little bit more. Maybe you really need to focus on the different types of tests and how to prepare for those. Maybe you need to be more aware of just study tips in general. And again, feel free to look at this document that goes really into detail with a lot of the concepts we just talked about. All right, I will be back in